was funerals on Friday up in Greenville, so it's been a busy time. Board controls all those things. I don't.
Would you ask Jen to step back over here? Would you ask Jen to step?
Madam City Manager, Madam Clerk.
Good evening.
Evening.
Mr. Badura, Mr. Runyon.
Here.
Mr. Newman.
Here.
Ms. Plow.
Here.
Ms. Devine.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mayor Benjamin.
Present.
Thank you.
Good evening.
I know it's not on the agenda. You mind if we say the Pledge of Allegiance and maybe have a prayer? I was looking for Reverend Baker. I don't see him here.
He's here.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Why don't we open the Pledge of Allegiance and Reverend Baker?
Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you, Father, for this another day. We thank you, God, for gathering us here to do your business, God, to serve this, your community. We ask, Father God, that you be with us, that you give all of those who are in the decision-making business wisdom, that they may do those things that is only pleasing unto you. We ask, Father, that you continue to bless this community. As we know, we've gone through a very difficult time, but we know, God, that you was with us. And we ask that you continue to bless and keep us. This, Father, we ask in your Son, Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Baker. We live in trying times, so it's great to have a good word. This is a emergency call meeting to put in place some emergency administration procedures following the flood. We've had some wonderful input from some of our citizens here on the crafting of these ordinances, which will require a first reading, and I anticipate they will be amended, tweaked between now and the second reading to make sure that we have the desired impact and certainly no unintended consequences, and then talk to staff about engaging with all interested parties between the first and second reading, which we anticipate will be on November 10th, 8 days from now. But the purpose of these three ordinances, the first three, and obviously the first and only resolution dealing with spraying for mosquitoes, are important. There are three different ordinances, as properly noticed to the public. One, enacting a temporary waiver of building permit fees. Second one, enacting a temporary waiver of business license fees for contractors for a period of 90 days. I'd like to speak briefly on that one. And the third one, which has received the most comments and most substantive comments, is enacting a temporary waiver on the 5-year cumulative period for purposes of determining whether substantial improvements have been made to a structure for flood hazard mitigation purposes. We can begin taking them up one by one. We're going to follow the rules of parliamentary procedure. I probably think if we're going to take comments, we can obviously take them according to the rules established for citizen comment by council. But I do want to clearly state we're going to be taking up different ideas as to how we can amend and improve this between now and the second reading. It is unusual, as many of you know, some of you come to more city council meetings than you care to come to, that we don't usually meet on the Monday night. It was important that we move forward very aggressively to try and get some of these ordinances into the city bloodstream. So, Madam City Manager, the first one.
Ordinance number 2015-092, enacting temporary waiver of building permit fees to provide for the expeditious and coordinated management of building permit applications, reestablishing the commitment of the city to mitigate the illegal performance of services by unlicensed contractors related to flood damage occurring on and after October 3, 2015, providing for severability, providing an expiration date, and setting forth an effective date.
So moved.
Second.
There's discussion of this item. Seeing none, we'll move to the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Runyon.
Aye.
Mr. Newman. Ms. Plow.
Aye.
Ms. Devine.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin.
Aye.
Item 2, ordinance number 2015-094, enacting temporary waiver of business license fees for contractors for a period of 90 days to provide for the expeditious and coordinated management of building permit applications, providing for severability, providing an expiration date, and setting forth an effective date.
So moved.
Second.
All right. I do have there was a concern raised by, actually by the home builders that I thought was a good recommended edit. And Gene, does everyone have a copy of this? You have several copies of it. And it was one that simply a concern that was raised. Obviously, we didn't want the waiver of fees only to extend to new businesses that were coming into town, and obviously we wanted that same waiver to extend to existing businesses that were conducting repairs under that dealt with flood relief as well. And Gene had some recommended language that would allow that to apply to all.
And I have a copy here if you want. I can make
Would you
extra
please
copies and
circulate
distribute
that?
them.
But for everyone who has a copy of the existing ordinance, existing draft before them, it would amend the section, the very first section, waiver of permit fees. These words would be stricken. Contractors who apply for a business license between the enactment of this ordinance and the expiration of this waiver of fees who otherwise qualify for a City of Columbia business license shall be issued a business license free of charge. That language is changed to say any work performed by a contractor which qualifies for the building permit fee waiver under Ordinance 2015-092 shall be exempt from consideration for the purpose of calculating that contractor's business license fee. You can speak to it, Jim.
The city clerk has indicated that there are copies for
Okay.
all of you in
Okay.
your
Oh,
packets,
perfect.
and that there are
Okay.
copies up front for the members of the public as well.
Yeah, it's titled alternate version.
It should
I'm
say
sorry.
alternate version on it.
Okay.
Ms. Plow.
I would ask, can you clarify the waiver is for flood-related business license, contractors getting their business license for flood-related improvements?
Correct. All of this is tied to whether or not the work that they're doing qualifies for a building permit fee waiver, which requires verified flood damage. Business licenses pulls that information from building permits to calculate the revenues upon which a business license is calculated. The amount of work that a contractor does that has had the fee waived because it's flood-related damage or repairs that they're performing, that amount of revenue that they generate will be excluded for the purposes of calculating their business license fee, and that will extend as long as that flood-related construction damage repair work is being done by contractors.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Runyon.
And just to clarify, this doesn't allow someone to operate unlicensed.
Absolutely not. It only affects what revenues are taken into consideration for the purposes of the fee. They still must get a license, and I believe that is being enforced.
Okay.
Yep.
Move the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Mayor, are you all approving the alternate version?
I'm sorry, that was an amendment. That was all the alternate version. But why don't we just in the interest of full transparency, disclosure, make that as an amendment to the ordinance as proposed.
Yes,
Is there
sir.
a second? Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, move the previous question. Clerk call the roll.
Mr. Badura?
Aye.
Mr. Runyon?
Aye.
Mr. Newman? Ms. Plow?
Aye.
Ms. Devine?
Aye.
Mr. Davis? Mayor Benjamin?
Aye.
Thank
Now, we'll move the previous question on the original ordinance.
Mr. Badura?
Aye.
Mr. Runyon?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Which are we voting on now?
Now we're voting
We're
on the
initially
ordinance.
voting just on the amendment recognizing,
okay,
and now
sorry.
we're voting on the ordinance itself.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Devine?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin?
Aye.
Item 3, ordinance number 2015-095, enacting temporary waiver of 5-year cumulative period for purposes of determining whether substantial improvements have been made to a structure for flood hazard mitigation purposes, providing for severability, providing an expiration date, and setting forth an effective date.
All right, so move. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Plow?
I think we have some folks here that really have raised some concerns. That Lisa Jones, if you might come and sort of raise the concerns about this,
Thank you.
clarify it for us.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Sherrard-Jones, and I'm a private consultant, but I used to be the NFIP State Coordinator here in South Carolina, and I live in this community.
Can you use the mic?
Yes, I'm sorry. I live in Richland County. I live in the Northeast, but I'm very familiar with these areas and having worked these areas many times.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your name again?
Lisa Sherrard-Jones.
Okay, I was trying to figure out, okay, so you're the email, okay.
Yes, and I had sent an email earlier today, just, asking you to just take your time on this one, for the simple reason that when a structure is declared substantially damaged, there's a policy benefit of up to $30,000 that's available for them to be used to elevate their house or demolish the house for the demolition costs and things like that they could use that money for. In addition to that, when we make an improvement to our house, the appraised value of the house changes. So when we come in and get a building permit, the house is worth $100,000, we do a $50,000 renovation, the house, market value may be worth $140,000. So the market value fluctuates as we make improvements to our home. So the tax value is not market value. And the tax value is what's being used as the initial test. And I was lucky enough to be able to participate in the development of the substantial damage, substantial improvement desk reference, and as a contributor when that was written by FEMA. And there are a number of other ways that we can use, other things we can use. You can use tax value as your first test, and if it fails there, you can move on to a number of different methods to help appeal that, to make a true determination if it is substantially damaged in relationship to market value without having to go get an appraisal. And so I just encourage you to please take your time on this one so that you're not unintended to deny someone a benefit they may be interested in using, as well as some of these structures were built what we call pre-firm back prior to the initial flood insurance rate map. Those structures are on a glide path to go to full risk rate premiums on increases of 15 to 18% a year for residents for residential properties and 25% a year beginning November 1st for businesses. And the way we get rid of that category is they elevate. There's a lot of money right now available for them to use to take care of that problem so they can get rated full risk rate premium and maintain the resale value of their house. We want to be able to encourage them to do that as they need. Not everybody can do this, and there's a way to work with those who can't afford it or have no desire to do it. And so I just encourage you to please consider, rather than suspending this, and that we would look at other ways, and I could work with your staff on other ways that we can accommodate these determinations without having to suspend this section of the ordinance. I want to thank you. The community rating system program is also something that I know that the city is very interested in getting into. It's a discount program where you can get discounts on your flood insurance. This is a credible activity under the CRS program. And Richland County is giving $82,000 back to their people by having this and other provisions in their flood damage prevention ordinance. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. Ms. Plow, please.
Lisa, could I ask you, are you saying that if we pass this waiver, that the FEMA dollars that might help elevate the structures will no longer be available?
That people may not qualify because the one thing they have to be declared is substantially damaged. And if they're not substantially damaged by the community and required to be brought into compliance, that $30,000 policy benefit is not available to them. It's only if they're declared substantially damaged would that policy benefit be available to them. It's called increased costs of compliance.
And that she's a bit nuanced too, Ms. Plow, and there some alternate scenarios that staff might be prepared to also speak to.
And that's, that's an insurance benefit that the staff may not be as familiar with as I am, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Joey or Ali, or someone want to speak to that question Ms. Plow raised?
Mayor, I
Or
would ask
someone
the
else.
staff to also give specifics, maybe a couple scenarios, if y'all can, Joey and Ollie, because I think it impacts some homeowners one way versus other homeowners another way. So we have to be very careful about suggesting that that's going to impact everyone across the board the same way if we don't do this.
We appreciate, Lisa's brought up some great points that we'd like to take a look at, but it goes either way. It helps some homeowners, it could hurt some homeowners, so we need to look at that. As far as the CRS program, we've been trying, we've got a plan to get into the CRS program, and we've been working with our local FEMA representatives to make sure that what we're doing is legitimate and we can do this. But also, whenever we do make the changes, when we go into the CRS program, we'll have to make some other changes in our ordinance. So if we make this change, we'll be able to make the change back to where it qualifies us for the CRS program. So we're going to take a look at the things that she's brought up, and if we need to amend the ordinance by the second reading, we can do that.
Sure. But as the city manager requested, can you guys, I think it's just illustrative, give maybe an example of this situation in play?
Okay. And Ali, you might be the best person to do that.
So you need an example of.
And speaking in layman's terms, Ali.
So you need an example of how.
Well, just as we were talking, as we were speaking earlier, the calculations and.
Okay, so what it is that let's say if a house worth around 400,000, and if it is not 2 feet above the 100-year floodplain, so we hold them for the structural value of that property. So if the structural value of that property is 400,000, they cannot exceed more than 200,000 for the repairs. So if they have pulled in past 5 years, let's say a permitting of $50,000, that would count towards that 50% for the 200,000. So if their repair is more than 150,000, so we're going to count that 50 plus the 150, and if they cross that threshold, that means they're not eligible. Either they have to raise the house, or they have to just demolish it and rebuild.
So so the purpose is to not have homeowners penalized for improvements made to their homes prior to the flood event.
That is correct.
But the challenge comes if folks who may have smaller homes
The challenge is for the homes which have less value in the structure.
and some of the discussion we talked about obviously was how can the ultimate resolution from our perspective be a way in which we can maximize the recovery of all of our citizens, but certainly not penalize them for improvements made to their homes over the last 5 years. And we need you all to come back in the next 7 days, or 8 days with the most optimal example. You're smiling. We're going to make you talk too if you want to talk. So, or at least introduce yourself. Sorry.
Good evening. My name is Timothy Russo. I'm with FEMA Region 4 out of Atlanta. I'm an emergency management specialist, and I specialize in floodplain management. On this disaster here, I'm the floodplain management group and insurance group supervisor on this disaster. I've been working closely with the city on these issues. The biggest, well, I don't want to say the biggest issue, there's pros and cons to everything. Taking this cumulative out of your ordinance to help a certain amount of people may affect another amount of people, a different amount. But you have to look at, like right now, the city is in the process of doing substantial damage to some of these structures. And to be honest with you, my opinion would be the wait till that is done, see who's in the special flood hazard area, see how many substantial damage properties you do have, and then see who it's going to affect. If you actually take this out, see how many people it's going to affect. That's the option I would do on this, to see how many people this is going to affect, because you're affecting them out. Because when you take that out, the people that have flood insurance that are substantially damaged, yes, they probably will not get ICC because there was a cumulative that they've been doing. But the people that are substantially damaged that don't have that or get substantially damaged will get ICC.
Are there ways to do it based on the value of the home?
Yes, market value of the home, yes.
All right, so wouldn't that help us substantially get to the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve here?
Yes,
Okay,
yes it would.
well,
Now,
you don't have to keep talking if you don't want to.
I'm trying to be very FEMA-ish, I should say,
Well,
because I got to be careful what I say. Again, it's pros and cons to this. When you take the cumulative out, you could be hurting a certain amount of people, and that's why I say wait for substantial damage to be complete, and then see how many people are substantially damaged first. And then out of those substantially damaged people, see how many of them have flood insurance. And then you can get a rough estimate of what number of people were damaged and what number of people will be using that cumulative, and what amount of people wouldn't use that cumulative.
in the interim, are you suggesting people don't move to improve their homes?
Well-
And I say the interim, understand.
Yeah, I understand.
Understand the interim is an unknown period of time.
Exactly. And, I mean, if you want to rush this, I mean, how many days are we talking here? What I'm saying is, when would you move on this or vote on this?
First vote tonight, second vote next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Next Tuesday?
Mhm.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Well, within that time period, you can get that information, and by the next reading,
that'd be great. That'd be awesome, I think, to have.
yeah. That way you have a
make
better,
it-
before you make a decision. Any questions?
Yeah, my only concern is, the Mayor is indicating that we may have enough information to get that quick and dirty look.
Well, we'll have it if I assume this is
We
information.
can work on the
procure, But
information.
you all can share
Yes.
with us.
Let me
Please.
Let me ask this. The suggestions or the recommendations you're making based on what we're proposing, is this based on your experiences elsewhere, or is this suggestion unique to the proposal that we're
In some disasters I've worked, they didn't have the cumulative in it.
I'm sorry?
In some communities, they didn't have the cumulative in it, in their
Right.
ordinance. Cumulative is a higher standard. It's not the minimum standard of the NFIP. In some communities I've worked, they didn't have it. In some communities, they did have it. So this actually is the first that I've seen being taken out of the ordinance. But it has happened in the past.
Tim, can you speak to, while you're at the podium, when you mentioned the highest standard, and it may take Ali also talking about this, but a lot of the questions that our citizens have raised regarding the base flood elevation level of the city versus FEMA, can you address that?
Yes,
And how that impacts flood insurance?
the NFIP has minimum standards. When you become into the program, we have these minimum standards. The BFE is actually a minimum standard. For example, if we're in a certain section and they have a BFE of 10, that's 10 feet. That doesn't mean 10 feet above the ground. That just means 10 feet above mean sea level. And that's a BFE. When a city puts freeboard into that, that's the extra foot above the 10 feet, like 1 foot of freeboard. So that would be 11 feet. That's a higher standard. That's not the minimum requirement. FEMA's minimum requirement would be that 10 feet. So anything above that is actually a higher standard. And so you have 1 foot above, 2 feet above, but also that 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 feet above also helps flood insurance holders. Because every foot above that BFE, up to 4 feet, they get a discount on their flood insurance. So if the city has a 2-foot freeboard, that means that 2 feet, those people that have flood insurance and are built 2 feet above the BFE are getting a discount on their flood insurance. And that's a higher standard. And these higher standards, if you want to belong to the community rating system or CRS program, actually turn into points that actually can go from Class 1 to Class 10, well, 10 being the lowest, 1 being the highest. And as you go down that to Class 1, you get a discount up to 5, 10, 15, 20% off a premium. So these are highest standards. The minimum requirement is just what FEMA is talking about, a BFE. That's the minimum requirement.
I probably, I'm going to wade into this. I know a little bit about it, but not much. And this seems, in my mind, to be a different issue from the 5-year. So we have moved away from the 5-year. We're now talking about a separate issue.
Okay.
But the concern that's been raised to me from multiple individuals is why we are not using the August 2015 flood-based elevation that's published by FEMA, that we have apparently decided that that's not good and that we're not going to use it. At least that's the interpretation that I've been given by people that are trying to get their work permitted. So can you help me understand, if it's a FEMA map and it was published, why we can't rely on it?
Ali can talk about a little bit more on that.
Yeah, this, you're talking about one particular LOMA for Burwell, which is on, starting from Burwell all the way up to Garner's Ferry. This study was done about 2 years ago, and it got official about 6 months ago. So we had our regular base flood elevation from our 2010 maps, which are in our ordinance, incorporated in our ordinance. And then after this LOMAR came in, it is an acceptable base flood elevation. But the thing that I have in question is that we have 2016 data available to us with our new maps. And with this LOMAR, the base flood elevation was dropped 2 feet. So the best available data that we have right now, and the 2010 maps that we have available, which are incorporated in our ordinance, shows the same base flood elevation. This is something we can issue permitting on, on the basis
This is
of.
something, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay. So on the LOMAR, we can issue the permitting on it legally. I mean, it is doable. But then again, our 2016 maps will going to come effective, and they're going to wipe out this letter of map amendment.
What about, I don't know about 16. I mean, it's been raised to me about the August 2015 maps that have been published.
Are you questioning whether or not we should or we can enforce the new maps that are out? Is that the question that's been posed to you?
I guess that's the question.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it makes a difference. And I understand that there are individuals and groups of individual homeowners who have filed protest or whatever against those maps.
The issue with that is we have to enforce what's in our ordinance, and the maps that are out now have either they have not, or maybe they're just finishing the public comment period. They're not published. They're published maps, but they're not. I don't know if I can. You might have to explain that.
Yeah,
They're not
I understand
enforceable.
FEMA has published them.
They're not enforceable for the City of Columbia because we can only enforce the maps that are in our ordinance. So once they make it through the public comment period and FEMA's incorporated all the comments, then at that time we can adopt them in our ordinance. So the reason we cannot enforce them right now is because they are not listed in our ordinance. If you look in our ordinance, it specifically calls for the maps that we can enforce. And if there's any LOMARs attached to those that FEMA has approved, we can enforce those LOMARs as well. But
And when would we be adopting the new maps?
It is going through the appeal process right now.
Okay, it's in the appeal process now. I mean,
Middle of 2016, I think, the process.
So people need to sit to the middle of 2016.
Our enforcement is on 2010 maps. They are
I know.
adopted. Yeah, but
I know that's the
yeah.
problem.
Right.
Well,
So what,
I guess what you're asking, though, even if it went through the process now, because the event happened under the existing map, would we be able to enforce the new map anyway if it hadn't been approved before the flooding event?
we can't enforce the new map until it's adopted in our ordinance.
Right.
If it's not in our ordinance, we cannot enforce it.
Yeah. Right, like say it went through the process and, because Ms. Plow's asking, when are we going to get it to approve? Even if it was ready for us to approve now, would we be able to enforce it because the flooding event happened under the previous map that's in our ordinance?
I think, and I'd have to get the legal interpretation of this, but I think it's an interpretation of the ordinance when you come to pull the permit.
Okay. So if it goes through the process and it's appealed, so going back to Ms. Plow's question, if it got approved 2016, people can't pull a permit till after that approval in order to
The maps that
use
are-
a new map.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to,
you're
I
good.
didn't mean to talk over you, I apologize. The maps that the community has right now, or the city has right now, is called preliminary maps. And these maps right now are going through a public, they got to go through the public, I think, 2 readings, and then they have to go through an appeals process. And once that is done, a letter of final determination comes down, and then you have 6 months, the community has 6 months to adopt those maps. Now, whatever period you're in right now, I don't know exactly which
It's an
stage you're
appeal.
they're in the appeal process right now. Now, if people want to build to those new maps, they can. They can come in. It's just the city can't enforce it because it's not legal yet. It's not enforceable in your ordinance. Now, if you want to, if somebody comes in and wants to say, I know you have new maps, I want to know what the elevations are, and I would like to build to them, they can. You can't really force anybody to build to them yet until you actually adopt them.
But I think in this case, and Ollie can answer more specifically, that we are basically telling people they have to build another 2.5 feet that the new maps wouldn't require.
Is it because they're a little
So the LOMAR actually, so we have 2010 maps, and the base flood elevation is established on those 2010 maps. Then the LOMAR come in, and it drops the base flood elevation 2 feet, basically. So what you are talking about is the LOMAR elevation that goes on elevation cert. It's not incorporated in our ordinance, but I don't know, this is a question for Tim, if it is possible to use that base flood elevation for.
The letter of map revision is what we're talking about, the LOMAR letter of map revision, is that when the maps originally came out, somebody challenged the map, said this is a problem here. They came up with an engineering study.
I know.
And they changed it. And so the map was revised. Now, that's what we call a letter of map revision, and that LOMAR is for that specific, I believe, I don't know if it was on a property or a structure.
Yeah.
Okay, it was on a structure.
It was on a Kmart building.
As of right now, yes, that LOMAR is in effect until the new maps are adopted. That LOMAR is in effect for that section. Now, the thing is when the new maps come out, that LOMAR is going to go away because it gets absorbed into the new maps, the preliminary maps that I was talking about earlier. So as of right now, legally, that LOMAR, whoever in that section there, they can build to whatever that LOMAR says what the base flood elevation is.
Because they're using the 2010?
No, they're using the letter of map revision. It's a separate,
That's because it was appealed.
yeah, well, it was appealed, but that individual who appealed it actually brought in some scientific data and said, hey, listen, this was wrong. And then we accepted it. They submitted it to FEMA. FEMA looked at the data and changed it.
We
Now,
just need to figure out how we can help this large group of people that are impacted by this.
okay.
All right, so this particular LOMAR is only affected from Kilbourne all the way up to Garners Ferry Road. So anything prior to Kilbourne is not affected. So this is the only section which was studied and challenged for the map.
Prior to Kilburn?
Yeah.
What do you
I
mean
say
prior?
I'm sorry, I used the wrong word, I guess. Probably the Shady Lane and Milford, all that area is excluded off of it. The study only starts from where the cross-section past the bridge over
Burwell.
there on Burwell, exactly. From Burwell all the way up to Garners Ferry. That's the only area which is, this LOMAR is for. So any other people are not affected by it. These are the only people, basically, on Burwell and few houses on Kilburn, which are affected in this LOMAR.
Affected in what way?
Means that the base flood elevation was dropped 2 feet, according to this LOMAR, letter of map provision. And it's not
So
incorporated in our
unbeknownst to
ordinance.
them, based on a development somewhere else, that it affected their property.
Right. It actually helps their
It
property.
helped- it helped their property
I'm
in this
sorry.
situation.
I didn't get the question for you. It helps their property. So if the existing base flood elevation is 158 over there, it's dropped down to 156. So if their finished floor elevation is at 150, let's say 156, and they were supposed to be at 158, it helps them because now their house is in compliance.
Then why are they trying to achieve the August 2015 base flood elevations?
Because of that existing LOMAR. That's the LOMAR that they're trying to
But
quote.
they should have been approved when they came through then, if this new study was in effect that lowered it 2 feet. Correct? Not?
Say that, I didn't get that question. Say
Why
that
didn't we
again.
approve them is what?
Oh, it's not, we don't approve that. FEMA approves that. So the study is submitted to FEMA, FEMA approves it, and once it's officially approved by FEMA, then it becomes.
So do we not have a problem on Burwell?
I'm sorry?
Do we not have this 2 feet, 2.5 feet problem on Burwell? Is that what you're telling me, is that another study's been done, FEMA's accepted the study, there'll be a 2 foot, 2.5 foot reduction in the elevation requirements?
Yes. Gerald Lannon did that study, Pace Engineering actually did that study, and in that study, what he did is he took a water discharge readings from our gauges, and came up with a different base flood elevation. So,
And Ms. Pye, as you acknowledged when you started this line of questioning, this is a very important line of questioning that we need to have probably in the work session format, but I think there are a whole lot of folks who want to hear these answers. We want to make sure we properly notice it so folks can participate in this discussion more readily. So let's take up the ordinance before us. Mr. Badur.
I do have some comments about the 5-year plan.
Please.
Or, just to follow up. When we're talking about it's going to affect some people or it's not going to affect or advantage or disadvantage on helping or not helping some residents or some houses.
Right.
When we look at it, when we try to analyze the data, is there any way possible that we can look at the whole complex or the whole neighborhood or the whole area that it's affected rather than house by house?
yes, that's what
is
we
that-
are looking at, basically.
Okay.
We are looking at that. We are looking, next couple of days, we're going to look at the statistics at how many people are coming with the accumulated costs, for the 50% threshold, and how many are going to qualify for ICC. So we're going to weigh in, and see what kind of permitting is coming in, from different people, from different areas. But more likely, this is from Lake Catherine, Burwell, Quill Lane, Old Neck, Downing Street, So this will going to be we will going to collect that data.
I just
We are
think
collecting that
I just
data
think it's
right now.
important that we look at the whole neighborhood or the whole, for Portobello is one of the neighborhoods that is affected. So the whole circle or the whole complex of houses, how
Right.
does that affect it as a whole neighborhood? Because you don't want to demolish a whole neighborhood or half of it is gone and the other half is not gone. So we need to look at it if we can
Right.
get a little bit more data and
Right.
more
And
statistical.
we should be able to review that data. We are still
It's-
collecting it.
I'm Mary Catherine Bagnall. I live on Burwell. I'm really going to ask that you, the 5-year look back, that you not do a first reading, because I am meeting Mr. Khan tomorrow for the second time. I just bought the house, and I and my neighbors met this last weekend, Friday night, at the street to have dinner together. And I think you really need to look. We are affected, like so many others, but I'm asking you to look at this ordinance and look at how those with flood insurance and those that don't, what the impact's going to be. And I think they said earlier in the conversation that they're not really sure of the numbers yet. So look at your numbers and then look at this ordinance instead of doing it tonight.
We'll have more than enough time to take this up on second reading as well. Ms. Bagnall?
Yeah.
But also, it's important to reflect, several of your neighbors have also asked us to move forward on this too. But we will have time between now and next week to make any changes. I mean, you'll have opportunities to continue to converse with Ollie, give us some additional feedback, and it may dissuade us fully if there's some additional information yielded from the FEMA maps. But I just think it's important for us to be responsive and deliberative in moving forward. We do have time, and if we decide that there's some unreadiness between now and next Tuesday, we can choose to delay that vote as well. I mean,
Okay.
but it certainly gives us more options.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And so, Ali, you and Ms. Bagnall meet tomorrow? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Ms. Plow, is that the same group of homeowners you were asking about us meeting with as a whole, or do you want us to do that tomorrow as a whole for this particular part of the discussion, or?
I particularly have one or two that have asked for the meeting to deal with the flood level, the base flood level. You know, we can certainly invite others to join us. Have we got a time?
I missed you. We were talking about 8:30 in the morning, but I don't know if that works for everybody, so we can talk with you afterwards, if that's fine.
Okay.
And I do want to reflect the fact, y'all, we know that these regulations at all levels are complex. They are nuanced. We want to make sure we make the best decisions we can with the information we have available to us, and we need as much as we can get as soon as we can possibly get it. Move the previous question, clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Runyon.
Aye.
Mr. Newman.
Aye.
Ms. Plow.
Aye.
Ms. Devine.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin.
Aye. All right, the first reading.
Yes, sir. Item number 4, ordinance number 2015-091, revised, amending the 1998 Code of Ordinances of the City of Columbia, South Carolina, Chapter 2 Administration, Article 2 mirroring council, Division 2 council meetings, quorum, and rules of order, and adding Section 262 remote meeting attendance. Mayor Benjamin and council, I believe there are two versions.
Just tell me,
as well.
why do we have two versions?
And let me clarify that for you. Ms. Plow brought to my attention that earlier today that it might have been confusing to everyone involved, and for that I apologize. What I was asked to bring back for everyone to consider was both what was presented to the Administrative Policy Committee and what came out of Administrative Policy Committee
Okay.
with their revisions. What was attached to the agenda originally was basically a red-line copy of what was presented to the Administrative Policy Committee.
So this is properly noticed. So
Well, it is, except that the way it appears here, it would seem that the ordinance that's being proposed is to eliminate the entire quorum section of our city code. That is not the intent. And it never was. It was not the intent of the Administrative Policy Committee either, and I think it was merely the format of our agenda that made it appear that way, and I apologize for that.
So,
What was presented, so I've given to the members of the public, and then in your packet as well, you have two versions here. And what you have is one labeled as presented to the Administrative Policy Committee on 10/20. That was what was presented to the committee was discussed by the committee members. They decided they didn't want to move forward or recommend this version and made suggestions about how to change it. Those changes resulted in what you also have as changes reflect APC's changes to the proposed ordinance. And again, I apologize for the confusion.
So-
I didn't want anyone to think that what anyone was trying to do was remove an entire section of the policies and procedures.
So that we're clear, ordinance section 2-53 is unaffected by what we're dealing with here tonight, right?
If council were to decide to proceed with remote voting as an option, what was presented before is we wanted the opportunity for everybody to look and see what was originally presented and then what the policy committee recommended going forward. If remote participation is the desire,
Sure.
that would be unaffected,
Well,
correct?
just in the interest, of course, just so the public knows what we're talking about the ability for council people to participate in council meetings via some type of
Electronic
remote,
participation.
electronic, telephone, internet, satellite-enabled audio, video conferencing.
Correct.
So as recommended by the committee, and I was talking to Ms. Plow, she's told me it's important to her that we move on this today, so I'm trying my best to accommodate that. As recommended by the committee, Section 2-53 quorum is unaffected
Correct.
by what's before us.
Correct.
And only 2-62 has not significant
Correct.
changes, but this explicitly states that members can participate.
Correct.
But they cannot vote
Cannot
under the
vote.
proposal.
And would
Right.
not be considered a member of the quorum. And this
Okay.
will be a new section to our code.
I will let the record reflect, there's a smiley face right here, Ms. Plow, highlighted that says the mayor can't resolve an issue if there's technical difficulty. It's a council decision, but I'll accept that. So the issue before us, I'm not sure if we need to make it clear what's a motion, since this might be somewhat different than what was noticed, but it may not be. What's your recommendation?
My recommendation is that that a motion be made that the Administrative Policy Committee's recommended remote meeting participation section be voted on tonight.
So moved. Is
I'd
this-
like to make the motion. I don't.
Oh, please,
I can't
absolutely,
make
please.
the motion, I don't believe.
Please. Go for it, Ms. Plow.
I would like to move the ordinance 201509-1 as reported out by the Administrative Policy Committee that exclusively deals with remote meeting participation be approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. I think Mr. Badura beat you to the second, Mr. Davis.
I love it.
And I would let the record reflect that the mayor was in support of council members unable to attend for specific reasons being able to vote. I think that would be moving in the right direction, moving into the 21st century. But happy to take the committee's recommendation. We move the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Runyon.
Aye.
Mr. Newman.
Aye.
Ms. Plow.
Aye.
Ms. Devine.
Aye.
Mr. Davis. Mayor Benjamin.
Aye.
A resolution, item number 5, resolution number R 2015-102, authorizing the city manager to approve requests to Richland County for controlled spraying for mosquitoes throughout the city of Columbia.
So moved.
Sir.
Can we maybe urge the county to move forward post haste if they aren't already with mosquito spraying?
Yes, sir, I think that they are working with FEMA to get that done aerially.
So the city, the county does the spraying, not the city.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I was dealing with this week, so this is
So,
I think we were all dealing with it this
HVAC.
week.
yeah,
HVAC,
move.
is that right?
But they also spray in city limits, right?
Yes, they will. We will move forward with working with the county administrator, making that request.
Move the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Runyon.
Aye.
Mr. Newman.
Aye.
Ms. Plow.
Aye.
Ms. Devine.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin.
Aye. Before we adjourn, I want to encourage everyone to go out and vote tomorrow.
Yes.
Participate in democracy.
Yes.
Right,
Is there a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Second.
Move the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Runyon.
Aye.
Mr. Newman.
Aye.
Ms. Plow.
Aye.
Ms. Devine.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin. Have a good evening.